One of the challenges within any organization is creating connections between different parts and those who work in them. Most companies suffer from silo separations, institutional barriers, and politics, which means that you are not working effectively together. That translates into losses in innovation, productivity, shared mission, and effectiveness. That is exactly why I created the Connecting Disconnections framework, a way to help organizations create workplace communities. I leverage sociological insights, community development frameworks, and a keen understanding of employee experience to help make your organization connected. You can check out the program at GaryConnects.com and contact me, Gary David, to learn more about creating workplace communities and connecting your disconnections to create more innovative, effective, and exciting organizations. Now, on with the show.
1, 2, 3.
Hi, I'm Gary David. Welcome to Experience by Design, the podcast where we explore experience designs of all kinds. I wanted to start out with some exciting news, and that is with this episode of Experience by Design, we will have topped the 25,000 download mark. I know 25,000 is an arbitrary number, but it does mean something. It does mean that this has been going on for a little while now. It means that we have been consistent in welcoming great guests onto the show, and you have been consistent in your listening. So if anything, that 25,000 number is a mark of consistency. And you know what? Showing up has to count for something. So thanks so much for making 25,000 downloads of Experience by Design possible. And I know that there are a lot of podcasts out there to listen to. By one estimate, as of January 2026, there are 4.58 million podcasts. That's a lot of people churning out content that runs the gamut of topics and guests. And if you look further at these podcast stats, you will also see that nearly 1/3 of podcasts are in the length of 20 to 40 minutes, which does make Experience by Design stand out in a somewhat unique way in terms of the length of my conversation with guests. Seems that only about 15% of podcasts last an hour or more. So, the question is, why go for an hour when most podcasts go for a much shorter length of time? The easy answer for that is, quite frankly, stories. Part of my goal here at EXD is to hear the stories that people have to offer, to learn about the people behind the products and the offerings. I like to think about it like Humans of Experience Design, where you have Humans of New York that became, and it is so popular in terms of just finding stories that people have to tell about themselves. Who are they and what makes them them? As an ethnographer, I do like to hear people's stories. I've always liked to hear people's stories, and I've always been pretty good at getting their stories out of them. I've also found that people like sharing their stories. In many ways, the manner in which we share stories is what makes us human, or at least more human. My guest today knows all about telling stories. Bill Blankschaen is here to talk about his book, Your Story Advantage, a proven path to maximize your impact, influence, and income. Bill's background has roots in his study of English and history, both of which are rich in stories. He then found himself leading a private school. While that was rewarding, he felt a calling for something more, and that was to help people tell their stories. This led to his company, StoryBuilders, which is a creative team of storytellers who are passionate about serving people with excellence in genuine, high-trust relationships. Bill and StoryBuilders provide coaching, assistance with writing, getting your story ready for launch, and getting it in front of your audience. They have worked with a range of business leaders, political figures, cultural influencers, and many more, helping all of them tell their stories and get their message out. Bill also is a multiple-time New York Times and USA Today best-selling writer and business founder, so he knows about telling stories and getting that message out. Bill and I talk about the path of finding purpose in life by engaging in your passion. We explore writing as a journey of exploration rather than just a final product. Bill relates about working with people who have a clear vision on what they want to do, as well as those who just have the desire to tell a story but not quite sure how. We also talk about the emergent area of hybrid publishing. While self-publishing has become more accessible, it's still important to ensure quality and align publishing strategies with the author's goals. He emphasizes StoryBuilders' approach to customize the publishing approach that they take to each author's needs. Finally, Bill talks about the role that AI is starting to play in the writing and publishing process and how it should complement creativity rather than replace it. Great conversation. Hope you enjoy it. As I was preparing for talking to you, I was reflecting on the fact that you catch me at a unique time of the year, which is grading season. And I'm grading students' attempts at writing at final papers. and I was, as I was talking to a person who helps people craft stories and narrative, and I was just going through with my students how to craft stories and narrative again.
Right.
Try, and it's an interesting moment with AI because so many students are fixated on writing as product and not writing as process and journey.
Yeah.
And trying to get them to reflect on, the thing about writing is not just the product you create, but the process of exploration that you go through to get to that point. And that's important as well, and not just the final product.
Right. I agree.
Is that part of what you do also with your work, with your clients and yourself, is not just the final product, whether it be book, learning experiences, whether it be whatever content, but getting to know oneself and one's message and one's calling through that process as well?
Yeah, I literally, the call I was just on before we connected, working with a guy, early stages, he was kind of fleshing out his ideas. And one of the things I explained to him was, hey, we don't have to understand all of that completely right now because we're going to go through a process. Writing is a process. And as we help you write your book and develop that, your message is going to evolve. It's going to, it in itself is going to cause light bulbs to come on, and we're going to add value, and we're going to have conversations, and it's going to be a process. Writing is a process. I've never encountered a book where someone had a clear vision of what they wanted at the outset and it stayed the same throughout. It always evolve their thinking as they go through, because you actually have to wrestle with the words. And do I mean that word, or do I mean that word, or do I mean this message, or do I mean that? Or is it something else entirely, right? So yeah, it is. The writing process should be a learning process. And I think you're right. I think with AI, it has the potential for some people to turn it into, I'm just cranking out a product. I'm just cranking out word widgets.
Right.
And you lose the whole thought process behind it.
I wonder why we have this sense that the first words we write on a page will be there. They're the final words. Because if you watch artists' work, which I have,
sure,
they are, light touches, sketching in, getting like very rough sense of movement and space and object. And then as they become comfortable in things relation to each other, then they start to go in with more permanent lines. Right. But yet we with writing are like, nope. When I'm writing, the first words have to be there, and there's no sense of process.
I think part of that's reinforced by our education system at the grade level system, or even and many times the college level, right, where you just have to turn in a certain number of words, a certain number of pages, and unfortunately, I mean, some of the highest grades I ever got in college were papers that I whipped off at the last second. They were first drafts. They weren't very good, in my opinion, but the teacher gave me a good grade. So I thought, all right,
well,
I guess that's what you need.
If that's going to work, you might as well use it.
But I've always said writing doesn't begin until you have a first draft. Until you have something out to work with, you can't even begin writing yet. And most people think the first draft is the end. So
right, and you were an English major and history major as an undergraduate in college. What drew you to those majors?
The love of stories, and what are the stories and how do we tell them? Yeah. It's been all those things.
Well, any particular part of history that you were focused in on?
the non-Western elements fascinated me. It was kind of both sides of it. Non-Western, like Japanese culture, really fascinated me, but then also American history. I think both of those, and I actually did a minor in African American history as well. So I just loved exposing myself to cultures and stories that I wasn't as familiar with, and becoming more exposed to how do other people live and tell those stories, and what does that look like. So it was really kind of just that variety, I felt like, and then seeing similarities between Japanese and African American and early American, and how all the common threads came together, and what those patterns are and what that looks like. It just always fascinated me.
It takes us away from this sense of history as a recitation of facts and into a collective representation of how we'd like to see ourselves reflected in our origins. This idea of myth, and when I say myth, not being untrue, but myth as a narrative representation of society and self.
Yeah. What is the bigger story? How do I fit into it? What's my purpose given that story? How does my life have meaning? What is it? All that story context that gets created around that. Absolutely.
We just had this 250th, I think it was, I'm bad at math, anniversary of Patriots Day, or, of Concord, in Lexington.
Right.
I had a grad student I was working with who was doing a project on the challenge of representation of audience and voice in this history. And one of the interesting, this kind of goes to some of the work that you do.
Sure.
People learn a history, and then when they visit a place, that's what they expect to see because that's what they learned. But what they learned isn't a full representation. So part of her work was, well, we need to include these other voices that aren't represented. And the response she would get is, well, that's not what the audience wants. And so there was this tension between what the audience is looking for, but then trying to give some representation of a more inclusive, diverse story that was part of the origin, but has been neglected for whatever reasons. And how to balance those things between what do they want, but what do I think they need to hear?
Right. Yeah. It's interesting. I came across that when I was in Japan, actually, looking at some of their military museums.
Okay.
And so looking at World War II, especially from the Japanese narrative that they tell now, and as an American growing up, what has that narrative been, and seeing the two different sides of the narrative and really understanding it more from their perspective,
right?
I think was really powerful. And I think it is a dilemma, at least when it comes to history. It's a dilemma because history, any story is told with a bias of some sort, and you can't avoid that. You can acknowledge it and factor it in, but at the same time, it's impossible to have an unbiased narrative. And so when I talk about storytelling, it's always about who are we telling the story for, like you just said. Who's the audience that we're telling it for their benefit? But in history, in some ways, at least we would hope, our goal is to create as close to an unbiased version as we can. So it's a little bit different than storytelling that we might use in life and business.
I remember one of the big books I read as an undergraduate that kind of opened my eyes to different perspectives was Howard Zinn, People's History of the United States. And it really came at things from a different angle about who's being represented. You talk about the Japanese, the World War II started when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. No, it started when the United States created an oil embargo against Japan to limit its internal development and self-sufficiency. The Japanese version of when it started being very different than the American version of when it started. And, can both things be true based on a matter of perspective?
Perspective, sure. Yeah. No, I agree. I think that is where it comes into play. Yep.
And then as a person who's trying to represent, as a historian, what's our role in trying to create this, not weighted representation, but providing, different points of view for the audience then to engage with themselves?
Right. Yeah. No, I agree.
So what took you away from history and into other pursuits?
Well, I mean, I'd always loved history. I'd always felt I don't know, this might make sense to you. I'd always felt a sense of place and time, even as a child. When I would go to historical places, I would just almost like feel a sense of history at wherever I would go. So I always loved that. And then writing and reading like stories and how do we tell them? And I think that actually led me into education. Right, that's what positioned me to think about. All right, how can I talk about those stories, and so help found and lead a private school in Ohio for many years. And what I realized was I was doing that. I was teaching those things and doing good work, but at the same time, I wasn't really engaging with it because like I'd always thought of myself as a writer, but I wasn't really writing.
Right.
I always thought of myself as a storyteller, but I wasn't really telling stories. I was helping other people learn how to do that. And so that really became kind of an extension then of who I am. As I got clear on my identity, I began to try to align what I do with who I am. And when I was able to do that, that's when I realized, all right, I can't continue in this role of being a school leader and still fulfill what I feel is like the calling on my life, or what I'm wired to do. Right. And so stepping out from that into the story direction and founding StoryBuilders was really more about aligning what I do with who I am in a very authentic way. And it's continued. I mean, it's been an ongoing journey to try to always hone that and get clear on it and leaning more into what I felt was my purpose, if you will.
Yeah, the idea of calling is such an interesting one to me, because on one level, when people talk about a calling, it's, well, what will I do? What can I do to make me happy? That's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is, what can I do that puts me in the best position to turn my gifts into something that benefits community and society? Sure. It's not just about me, but it's like, what can I, how am I put here to serve some greater purpose, some higher purpose that makes the world a better place?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't think it's complicated. And this isn't new to me. I mean, I kind of draw these three elements. One, what are my strengths? Right. What am I actually really good at? And that takes a while. Most people don't know their strengths. They don't know what they're really good at because their strengths feel normal to them. And so they don't see them as a strength. That certainly was the case for me. Like when I first took Marcus Buckingham's Strength Finder assessment back in the day, it said one of my strength themes was this thing called input. Well, I had never heard of such a strength theme before. I didn't know what that was. But essentially it meant that I can consume vast amounts of information and hold it suspended in mental midair and connect it and play with it and do that. And I always thought everybody could do that.
Right.
And the reason everyone wasn't as much of a voracious reader as I was, because they were just lazy or they didn't like to read or something like that, right?
Right.
But it wasn't. That was an actual strength that I had. So finding those strengths, and then that sense of fulfillment. What do I actually enjoy doing? Which I think is part of strengths, because strengths are things that you enjoy doing. They're life-giving to you. And then that third element of, how is this doing good in the world? How is this accomplishing something positive? How is this making the world a better place? I think when all three of those overlap, that's where you tend to be in that sweet spot. And that's not an original thought, but I think so few people are willing to do the work to actually find that. And are willing to even take the chances and step out by faith or, whatever to pursue that. And find that, and so they live more in fear, right? And they stay stuck in stuff that, well, at least it's paying the bills, rather than stepping out and pursuing that. And then they wake up 30, 40 years later and wonder, wow, where'd all that time go? What did I do?
Yeah, it's you were in education, I'm in education. Sure. It's a common theme with talking with undergraduate students, especially where I'm at a business school, where a lot of them, or if not all of them, come to my school because they feel they can get a job when they graduate, and jobs are good things to have. So I'm not, belittling that or judging that, but also this tension of, is this what I want to do? You come from an English and history major.
Sure.
So there's so much question now in American society around the value of college education. And if I get a major in English and history, what kind of job am I going to do with that? Because I can't open up the want ads and find a job in history open.
Sure. Yeah.
But it can serve a higher purpose and function when you learn how to apply it and integrate it given the other strengths you have.
Yeah. Well, and that's my decision when I pursued that degree was simply I wanted a as close as I could get to like the classic liberal arts degree, training of just being able to think,
right?
to think and communicate. And then whatever thinking that'll qualify me for whatever direction I want to go from there. Right. And it still leaves it all wide open. That's what I often counseled high school students who came through our school. Like, if you're not clear on what you want, don't get a very specific degree that narrows you down. Like, teach yourself, learn how to think, learn how to function in the world, and teach yourself in those processes. Because especially the way information is multiplying, the way technology is multiplying, that's the more valuable asset.
For sure.
Is not I'm qualified in this specific area, but I've equipped myself to qualify myself in any number of different areas going forward, so I can be flexible with it as progress takes place.
Well, we're kind of seeing a little bit of a full circle moment with, as people talk about AI and whether what it can do and can't do, is these quote unquote soft skills are becoming more prominent because the quote unquote hard skills, and I love that dichotomy, but just using that language, is at risk of being replaced by automated intelligence or these computer programs that can do that work more quickly and efficiently, and leaving open the thinking and the communicating skills that you're talking about.
Yeah. I agree with you. I don't know that that's a true dichotomy like that. Those terms have been used for decades now. And in every decade, people have said, but it's not that soft skills aren't important. They are very important, right? So we need to teach them and so forth. So I don't know. In some ways, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And we tend to think that it's a new story or it's a new something that's taken place, and yet it's the same thing that has happened before. Just the names change as we move forward. So the same things become important. It's about your soft skills. It's about storytelling. I mean, at the end of the day, it's what story are you living? What story are you telling? Are you able to tell it well? Those are the things that really differentiate someone from everyone else that's out there.
So what was the epiphany that was like, okay, leading this school, valuable work, but it's not what I feel like I'm meant to do. What was the moment that became, I got to go in this different direction? How did that become an articulation of StoryBuilders?
Yeah. Well, it happened interestingly. I think with any change that we make in life, there have to be, in many ways, both push factors and pull factors. There's something pushing us to make us feel uncomfortable where we are. And with that, I think I had gotten into the repetition of on a annual, the education cycle, right? On an annual basis, it's like, all right, I'm seeing the same process again. I've done this before. I've solved this. This isn't new.
Right.
The people are new, but the process is the same.
Right.
And then there was this pull. As I said, I always thought of myself as a writer, and I was getting older. We were having kids. We had 6 kids at that time. And, life was moving forward, and I wasn't doing the things that I had always thought I was going to be doing in terms of storytelling. And so, I remember I enlisted help of a life coach. I talked to somebody in the space who gave me some advice, and went on a kind of a silent retreat, actually, for a weekend. And just was doing a lot of deep thinking about it, and eventually came to the point where I realized, somebody else could lead this school, but no one else can do what I feel in my heart is what I'm wired to do. Gotcha. Only I can do that, right? So I made the decision, I'm going to let go. And when I did, it was like a vice released me. Like I didn't realize how much I had become pressurized through that. And I felt such freedom. It was like I floated home. It was like, and then I knew I was on the right track when I went into the school the next Monday morning, and I felt that vice just shut down again. Like I was back in the vice on that. So I had seen what life could be like outside of a setting that I'd kind of sensed, all right, I'm not supposed to be in this long term. And so from that, make a long story short, stepping out of that, going through that process, really figuring out, all right, I'm going to step out and pursue this. And as I move forward, get more clarity on it. And one thing led to another. I actually ended up writing my first book. And I realized I'm actually good at writing books. And then people started asking me for help writing their books. And one thing, that led to, all right, I think we can build a team around this and let's help more people write books, tell stories, and build all those stories around that. And how do you monetize it? How do you multiply that message? How do you do that? How do you get that out there and really become something that really focused a lot with entrepreneurs, business professionals, thought leaders, and beyond, to help really take those ideas, that meaningful message, as I call it, and turn it into something that they could really make the world a better place. So that was really the connection between how StoryBuilders came to be, was out of that sense of, I don't know, the pain of staying put became greater than the potential pain of stepping out. So,
well, I think, you talk about making a decision and, the vice releasing part of that, I would imagine had to be, it wasn't just the vice of the structure of being in a position that you weren't necessarily best equipped for, but it was also the story you were telling yourself about you and what was, can I do this? I can't do this. That's irresponsible. I have a family. I have a job. I have responsibilities. Yeah. So, am I capable of doing this? Am I qualified to do this? And rewriting that and loosening that internal vice that we create for ourselves.
Absolutely. And I like to say sometimes you have to step out before you know how it turns out, right? Okay. And often you have to do that. And that certainly was the case for me. And what I learned was that you don't have to know all the answers to the entire journey. You just have to know enough to take that first step.
Right.
And when you do, it's almost like I was standing in front of a forest of trees. And from where I was standing, I couldn't necessarily see a path forward. But when I took one step forward, now my perspective shifted. Right. Now I saw the trees differently. I saw it at a different angle. The light was different, and I saw, oh, wait, there is a gap over there. Let me go through that gap. And then I go through that gap and all right, that's not exactly what I expected, but wait a minute, I do see more over here now, right? So that forward motion toward whatever is fueling you, it begins to open up things that you never thought was possible. There was a quotation, I put it in my book. That's a famous quotation by the gentleman whose name I can't recall right now, but he said, the moment that you commit yourself, the moment you actually mentally commit yourself and you're dialed in and you make that commitment, everything begins to shift. It's like the universe begins to align with where you are. And when we live life accidentally, the universe kind of responds like, well, all right, I guess you're you're unsure what you're doing, so I'm unsure what I'm doing.
Right.
We're just kind of chaotic in that sense. But once you have clarity and focus, it's always amazing to me how that clarity of the story you are telling yourself and that you're telling the world attracts greater clarity around that. Once you're clear on that, it seems like it draws more to you.
Makes me wonder, and you mentioned a call you just were on, when you're working with clients, the difference between someone who comes in thinking they know what they have, right? Okay, here's the thing. I know what I want to do. This is how I want to do it. And the person who has no idea. And I could imagine sometimes it's easier to work with a person who has no idea because they aren't wedded to something that they think they need to do or what it's going to look like.
Yeah, each one has its pros and cons. Sometimes people who come in with a very clear sense of, I want to write a book about this. I've had success with this message and I have clarity on it. Sometimes that can be very good. Other times we have to convince them that they should take 3 steps back and be less committed to that mediocre idea. Like there's a great idea here.
Right.
But with other people who are like, I don't really have clarity on it. People have told me I have a good message or my story has resonated or what I've put out there. Yeah, I just don't know. A lot of people wrestle with confidence. I call it the confidence trap, that we tend to deify others and diminish ourselves. Right. And so a lot of times in working with authors like that or entrepreneurs who are talking about their message for their brand and so forth, it's convincing them that they actually have something of value that can do good in the world. And so then adding value to that and starting from scratch can be helpful if they're able to buy into that confidence level. What we try to avoid in that case is this endless loop back to the beginning, right? Because when people lack confidence, ultimately they end up questioning and re-questioning and re-questioning. They're re-questioning and they just end up stuck in this cycle instead of moving forward.
One of the things that will diminish your confidence in your message is teaching undergraduates.
Yes, I can imagine.
And as you're talking, I was reflecting on this because I kind of operate in the educational realm and also the business realm. I'll deliver our content to my undergraduates, and they'll be, undergraduates. It's kind of like, checked out maybe, and maybe somewhat engaged, whatever. And then I go talk to business people, and they might say, "That's amazing." I'm like, "Well, I wish I could get you in my classes."
Right.
But it's, as an academic, when we are talking to these audiences that, they don't know what they don't know, it's hard to kind of see the value in our own work. And I've actually talked with a bunch of academics, the things we know are actually pretty good and pretty unique. And how do we then articulate that to broader audiences so that we can share our knowledge and insight with them?
Totally.
But we're only trained in articulating our knowledge in academic prose, which no one wants to read because it's really boring.
Right. Well, and I think as an example, like we've worked with John Maxwell's company for the last 10 plus years, creating all their instructional design materials, workshop materials, all that kind of stuff. And that's a good example because what John does so well, as in his own words, is he tries to put the cookies on the bottom shelf, right? He tries to take complex potentially ideas and simplify into easily digestible format. And I think that's right. A lot of people in academia have a lot of great ideas, and a lot of people in the business world have great ideas, but they struggle to turn them into language that the everyday user can put to use, right? And that's where the key is. That's in understanding the complexity and distilling it down to simplicity without losing the value of the complexity. That's really the challenge comes in. And I think that's something that I think that reflects my own unique giftings as well. And part of what StoryBuilders we've built around is the ability to continue to do that, to take those complex ideas and somewhat scattered, chaotic ideas and distill them down into something that's tangible. I get it. I literally just did this past week. We were working with one of our story partners doing a digital course and a learning experience and so forth. And it was tons of information. And so sifting through all that and distilling it down and then making it feel sticky and memorable so people could actually take it and walk out and live it out. That's where I think the magic comes in. There's so many great ideas in the world that just people never hear of because they haven't been able to turn them into something that's repeatable, sticky, scalable.
I once heard a radio personality, his name was Joe Madison, who said, his grandfather used to say, you got to put it where the goats can get it. Right. Kind of the cookies on the bottom shelf. You got to kind of make it easy for people to access and understand. And when we think about learning design in higher education, often that involves, can you put quizzes through technology or using Kahoot or using a Padlet or using these technical tools, but not always this reimagining content as story. Which I think is a fundamentally important element of learning design and learning experience is making it sticky through narrative. Yeah.
One of the things I realized about myself is what makes me a good writer is what made me a good teacher or makes me a good teacher is that I kind of innately saw how to take a person from A to Z, right? What the process is rather than, hey, let's just jump to Z. Here you go. Or let's fixate on Q. That'll for a while. Right. So it's taking them through that. And that's naturally how I teach, but it's also, discovered that's how I write and how good storytelling happens. It guides you, it leads you from one place to the other. You don't even realize that you're being led because it feels so natural to you as well. So I think, when you're intentional about that process, then it makes everything else easier, right? And so when you're creating a learning experience like that, even, it's the same thing of where are you, where do you need to go, and then mapping out all the elements in between. And we use our storytelling structure as a guide it's just classic storytelling technique to take people through that. But that whole learning experience creation, whatever it is, maybe whether it's a live experience or a digital experience or whatever the case may be, that just becomes so powerful. Right. To help people and to do it in a way that feels sticky and actionable, I think is the key to really having an impact in business or academia or whatever environment you're in.
I like to talk about turning complexity into action. And it's that translation. I find increasingly that it's translational work between academia business and the broader public, which is really the high value skill right now, because, as we look at complex problems, whatever they are, there's this need to translate what people are talking about in different places between each other. So there's more communication and understanding, because more often than not, the language we use in these different environments are so, tailored to those environments that it's impossible to understand one another.
Yeah. I agree. I like that analogy. But the common language is storytelling.
It is.
Right?
Yeah.
We all speak that. We're all wired to respond to it. It's woven into who we are. It's what we do. And so whenever we default to that, we reconnect to the story that we're telling and pull people into that story. It makes everything else just flow so much easier and invites connection.
It's interesting, and I know through StoryBuilders you also have a publishing element that I wanted to ask you about, because the publishing, whether it be self-publishing, hybrid publishing, traditional publishing, or a blog publishing on Substack or whatever, there's so many more opportunities for people to express themselves through the written word, but not necessarily the knowledge of how to go about doing so in a way that engages audience.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, and we do have a publishing imprint, a StoryBuilders Press. We also have StoryBuilders Faith. That's a more Christian focus, but StoryBuilders Press is more of our personal growth, leadership, business development, idea development, et cetera. But you're right, it's never been easier to do that. It used to be, even a few decades ago, you could go through one of the 5 big publishing houses, basically, and those are your options.
Right.
If they didn't like you, you were out, But that's not the case anymore. It's never been easier. So on the one hand, that's great. It's like it's opened up the, I think somebody referred to it as the information reformation, if you will. Like it's that kind of change. But on the other hand, it's resulted in a lot of people who put out books that maybe aren't done well or are half-baked ideas, or it's lowered the quality level in many ways of that. Just because you can doesn't mean you should in that sense. And so what we really strive to do is again, wrestle with ideas, elevate those messages, tell that story well. That's our first focus. And then on the publishing side of things, if that's a fit for them, what we do, and we'll steer them in that direction. But we also work with a lot of traditional publishers too. In fact, I was just working with another gentleman. We helped him find a different publisher because we thought it'd be a better fit for him, right? So, and we work with the big publishing houses also, right? And authors with that. So it really is about, there is no right answer to it anymore. It really is about, figuring out what is your goal. And this is why we always start with what we call the story strategy. If you're doing a book, for example, how does this book help get you where you want to go? It goes back to that identity question, right? Who are you? What are you trying to do? What are you trying to build? What are you trying to accomplish? And then let's make sure your actions align with that. And that's true for the publishing path as well as anything in life, really. But to me, it's really this quest to align identity with reality of how our behavior and what we're doing. Because so many of us, we don't do that, and then we're puzzled by why we don't like the results.
Right.
And so I think we have to begin with identity, even to do something as simple as figuring out what our publishing path is.
Right. And is your process more hybrid in terms of being a hybrid publisher, or
StoryBuilders Press? Yeah. It's definitely a hybrid publisher. Yeah, we leverage a lot of the print-on-demand technology, right? So we're a really good fit for people who are growing their platform, or they have established it to some level, but they want to maintain control. They want the flexibility. The reality is with hybrid publishing, your books can be, 90+% of books are sold online anymore.
Right.
That's where most sales take place. And so when you can leverage that and do it well, the reality is for traditional publishers, better than 70% of books lose money for them, right? So they're rolling the dice when they try to pick the winners is what they're doing. And it's those handful that do well that carry the rest of the load. Well, if you're not one of those one doing well, then you're probably not going to get as much value from it as you wanted to, and it may end up even being a bad fit for you. So, it's really about figuring out what is the best path of publishing, and then going from there.
And with Story Builders and Story Builders Faith, what led to the creation of Story Builders Faith?
I think, for me, my faith has always been right at the center of who I am. I mean, the school I started was a Christian school, and at the core of it, I think one of the reasons I really love storytelling is I see myself as almost a sub storyteller. Like
Right.
I see God as the ultimate storyteller, and I have the privilege of taking what's here and telling stories with it.
Right.
And so I think that's certainly part of it. And so Storybuilders Faith is more for those books that are really more explicitly Christian in their origin. And so packaging it in that way, really leaning into that message, things that more distinctly in that vein, that we could really focus on that for that Christian audience.
I went to an all-boys Catholic school, and one of the things was Christian Brothers School, is run by that order. And one of the things that I found compelling and refreshing about that experience was the lack of being afraid of discussing these topics with one another. Like religion class was a wonderful opportunity to engage in discussions of gospel and parable and things like that, and treat it as not just belief but also text to examine. I mean, in some ways, religion and faith is like the original self-help, right? It's like, how do I find a way of being salvation or a path forward or all of these things? And it's interesting in American society the extent to which discussions of faith are kind of seen as put off into a corner, while in other more general society we talk about things that are not faith-based.
Right. Yeah. I think we kind of put things in a faith box, if you will. Even as you said that, not faith-based, I think, I think everything's faith-based.
Sure.
Yes. so all the boxes we make are kind of false boxes to just understand things a little bit. But the fact is, all of us function on faith. And what I mean by faith, separate from a religious definitions, I mean, faith to me is doing what you believe to be true, often in spite of what you see, sense, or feel. Right? Not always, certainly, but it's faith is defined by doing what you believe to be true. And so I look at someone who's doing something by faith. That means, hey, you believe that to be true, and you're acting on it. Like, because faith, you really don't know what you believe until you're tested.
Right.
Faith isn't faith until it's tested. Before that, it's just words, right? But when it comes to it, going back to when I left the school, did I really believe I had this sense of calling? Did I really believe I could do that? Well, if I did, then I'm going to step out and act on it. Otherwise, I'm going to leave it and just walk away from it. So, I do think we often make this faith box, and I think because of that, partly it's become so charged that we struggle even to have conversations about these things that are so essential to life itself, and so we end up avoiding those with faith, politics, and money, or whatever the things we're not supposed to talk about. So, and yet those are the things that we're all concerned about. So.
And in some situations, sports teams, like if you're in Michigan and Ohio State, you can't talk about that.
That's
or
true.
Boston Red Sox and your Yankees. No, I think it's an important thing, because leaving the house in the morning is an act of faith. Being able to do anything that takes you outside of a realm of safety is an act of faith. And some of those are bigger leaps than others, like leaving a job to go start a new career, or having a child, or getting married, whatever it is, right? These are all acts of faith. And wherever one derives strength from, to give one the sense of, I can do this even though I don't know the outcome, or I should be trying this even though I don't know how it's going to turn out. In recovery programs, they talk about a higher power, however you define it. And that's what, I can't do this anymore. I need to have faith that something else can help me.
Sure.
And that is the original, self-help stories. Like, how do I find a path forward when I don't know the answers?
Yeah. And I don't think it's, the 1900th century philosophers, whether it be Kierkegaard or more recently Nietzsche and all, this movement to take a leap of faith, right? We've had this analogy of just leap into the void and trust. And that's not what I'm talking about either. Again, it's doing what you believe to be true. It's
Right.
it's not blind. Faith isn't blind, right? Faith, that I want to make clear that we're not saying, oh, just trust and close your
Okay.
eyes and step out there into nothingness, right?
Right.
It's using your mind, using your intellect, using all those things to really hone and figure out, what do I believe to be true and why? And then if I do believe that, then let me act on it. And it goes back to the whole point of my book, Your Story Advantage, is if you really believe your story, it has value, then you're going to take advantage of it. You're going to leverage that advantage to help other people and build your brand or business or whatever the case that might be.
And, again, going back to, I'm doing what I want to do, what I think my calling is, what I have faith and I'm good at, but I'm not just doing it for me. I'm doing it to extend that into the world so that it's a benefit to others as well.
Yeah. Yeah. To make the world a better place. I mean, that's really what it comes down to at the end of the day is do I make this world a better place when I leave it? Is it better as a result of my having been in it?
Right.
Or have I just run out the clock and now it's time to go?
Yeah, I think that, in experience design, people talk about like, what is experience design? I'm like, well, we're just trying to make things better. If everything we create is design oriented, whether intentionally or unintentionally, part of experience design is understanding that everything we do is an experience, to try to create those experiences intentionally and to do so in a way that makes things better than they were before.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. At the end of the day, it's not complicated.
Right. No, it's really not. And when, and I got to teach 14 weeks. Right. I got to make it a little bit more complicated.
Right.
Because I got to, they're paying money for 3 credits. And if I just do that, but that goes with the process of realization, right? I mean, that I can tell my kids what I think, based on my life experiences, this is what you need to know, but they got to go through it themselves before it really sticks.
Totally. Yeah. And that's part of that storytelling. You and I have talked about that previously, right? That even the writing process itself is a discovery process. Right. The storytelling process is a discovery process. And as we live out this story, we learn and we grow and we change and we develop, and it's all part of it.
So what do you see as some of the, with all of this disruption people talk about with AI, and also, I mean, I even think about sometimes if I can write better by hand than if I'm on a computer, because if I'm writing by hand, it slows me down to be more thoughtful than if I'm typing on a computer. Yes, I can do it more quickly, but quickly is not always better. So the ways in which technology is changing our storytelling process and the ways in which it won't, because some elements of storytelling are just essential to it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, storytelling itself isn't going to change based on technology, because good storytelling is about what really resonates with other people. How do we connect via that way? And that's partly the way we're wired. It's partly the way story works itself. I think AI, at the end of the day, when the dust settles, it's going to help eliminate a lot of the routine associated with this, with the writing and the creative process. It's going to free creativity when it's done well. It's going to free people to be more creative, not replace their creativity. So if we're looking at AI as a replacement, I don't have to do the work of creativity anymore. That's not going to happen, because AI isn't capable of creating original thoughts. It isn't capable of connecting things that were never connected before. It's very good at replicating what has been done before and matching and aligning with different styles and things and so forth. So that's all certainly going to be true. But so I don't think at the end of the day it's going to change storytelling itself. I think what it's going to do is make it even more accessible to people who are willing to engage the process. And I think it's going to make other people who are not really willing to engage the process, it's going to make them attempt to push the easy button using technology. Again, right now it's AI. In the past, it was other inventions and breakthroughs and so forth that caused people to say, oh, okay, here's the easy button. Here's the easy button. And what you end up in those cases is a mediocre story. You end up with mediocrity. And, mediocrity has never stood the test of time. Right, the excellence rises to the top. Excellence stands out. One book I've been reading lately is David McCullough. I don't know if you're familiar with David's work for decades. He's just such an eminent historian. He's passed now, but such a storyteller, narrative historian. And, his book, The Great Bridge, about the Brooklyn Bridge, took 4 years to write.
Wow.
And if you can imagine if somebody were to try to use AI to write that, it would be the most uncompelling, boring
Right.
thing you could ever read. And yet when he tells it, for those of us who like that level of history, it's compelling, it draws you in, it's got drama, it's got all these things. And so that's a great example of you cannot replace the human element. And so I think what we're seeing now, yes, AI is revolutionary. Yes, it's changing so many things. And I think you're seeing the surge of it. And then we're going to see the tide shift a little bit. And then we're going to recalibrate and adjust in the middle and then move forward. So it's going to change. It can change things. It can make things better. But, my concern is that I think people who want the shortcut are going to use it as a shortcut and end up finding it to be just a detour.
I'm a huge fan of historical fiction. I do a lot of reading on World War II in the Pacific. So I've come across a lot of historical fiction, including one more recently by Admiral Safrades, who was in charge of NATO, who wrote a historical fiction piece about World War II in the Pacific around these three characters. And, there's love, there's drama, there's romance, there's heartbreak, all these things about World War II by a Navy retired admiral. I'm like, wow, look at you. But it's this historical fiction often can make it easier to remember the details of things and the context of things than just, a Jack Webb, just the facts, ma'am, kind of school of history.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, stories make things sticky. That's the reality, right? So that's where I think is so much of the value of storytelling. It opens the pathways, opens the neural pathways, it opens the heart pathways, it opens all those pathways so that, people can actually be open to learning and growing and becoming something else that they otherwise might never have been.
Well, I think you need a t-shirt now on your website that says stories make things sticky.
Well, we do have one that says every story matters, but it's not on the website yet. So, yeah.
Maybe a bumper sticker or maybe something, because stories make things sticky sounds like a really good slogan.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's good.
This has been fantastic, and I will make sure that with your book and with the website on StoryBuilders and all of your work, everything will be available in the show notes. And if folks want to get in touch to work with you and your team about how to tell their story.
That's awesome. Well, the easiest way to do that, go to our website or just book a call at mystorybuilders.com/story. And they can just schedule time, and always happy to talk about stories and how we might be able to serve them.
Well, thanks so much for taking the time, Bill. It's been fantastic.
Oh, absolutely, Gary. Appreciate it. I love the conversation. You've got me thinking about other things that have to do with story that we're gonna keep the wheels turning myself.
Fantastic. Well, thanks. I want to thank Bill Blankschaen for joining me to talk about pursuing your passion, storytelling, publishing, and faith. You can find out more about his work, his writing, and his company StoryBuilders in the show notes. As always, if you have any feedback on this episode or any episode, you can head over to feedback@experiencexdesign.com to send your message. And if you're on the website, you can also provide your email to subscribe to the EXD newsletter to stay on top of all of the EXD news. And after you do that, you can also buy me a coffee. Help me defray the cost of putting on the podcast by giving me any size donation. Anything is welcome and anything helps. So if you like this episode, if you like what we do, and clearly you do because there's 25,000 downloads of this, take a moment to provide any financial donation contribution to help me bring you this content. Another thing you can do for me is help me talk to your audience. If you have an event coming up for the next year, any professional development, training, keynote session, or anything else, and you need a speaker with humor, insight, charisma, who is easy to work with, and you can't find that person, you can settle for me, Gary David. You know me from the podcast, and you can also have me at your event. You can check out my speaking profile at GaryConnects.com, and you can contact me directly at Gary@GaryConnects.com. I know it's a lot of emails, but each one serves an important purpose. So make sure you do so. You can also connect with me through LinkedIn as well as Experience by Design podcast. So if you're a LinkedIn person, and I know some of you are because I see you there, you can go to the Experience by Design page and make sure you give that a follow, and make sure you give me a follow. Or if you want to, you can also connect with me if you're ready for that level of commitment. And with that, as always, be safe, be kind, be well, and be here for the next Experience by Design. Bye.